Before we dive into the story, if you're enjoying these meaningful stories, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new one. I once lived in a tent, right beneath the window of the room my family gave away. No one asked if I had a sleeping bag. No one cared if I was warm. Lily was my twin. When she got pregnant at 15, our parents gave her my bedroom, not with cruelty, but with logic. They didn't kick me out. They erased me with silence. It took me 7 years, 3 jobs, and 1 bakery to reclaim what was mine. Not with anger, but with receipts, court records, and my grandfather's hidden will. If you stay with me, you'll see how silence became my shield and how I turned their lie into legal proof. You'll learn exactly what helped me win back my name, my house, and my peace. They said I used family money, but I had pay stubs, tuition receipts, and a handwritten letter Grandpa never meant for them to find. If your family ever made you feel invisible, don't scroll away. You might be living in a tent too, and not even know it. Before we dive into the story, if you're enjoying these meaningful stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more. Now, let's start the story together. I was 15 when my parents gave my bedroom to Lily. She was my twin, but that night she felt like a stranger with better timing. They said it was temporary, just until the baby came. I remember Mom's voice softening as if kindness could dull the blade. "You're old enough to manage, sweetheart. Lily needs the space for the nursery." Her smile was tight. Dad stood behind her, nodding, not meeting my eyes. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just looked at the room that had been mine since we were 5. My posters still taped to the walls, my books lined in a neat row, and my name, written in black Sharpie on the closet shelf. Lily's name had already been stitched in soft pink across a baby blanket draped over the crib. That night, I dragged the old summer tent from the garage. It smelled of mildew and forgotten vacations. I wedged it between the garden beds in the backyard just beneath the window of my old room. Through that window, I could hear them laughing as they cut slices of cake, pink frosting sticking to paper plates. No one came to check if I had a sleeping bag. No one asked if the zipper worked or if the air would dip below freezing after midnight. My breath came out in white wisps. I curled tighter, trying to warm the spot where my knees met my chest. I had a flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. The light would only remind me of what I didn't have. Lily was inside, glowing under fairy lights and family attention. She had been the golden one since we were little. I used to think it was because she was louder, brighter. Now I knew it was because she gave them something, a future, a grandchild. I gave them silence. I gave them space. Mom had whispered earlier that day, "You'll understand one day, Rachel, when you have your own children." Maybe she meant it to be comforting, but even then, I knew I'd understand it differently. In that cold tent, on a patch of backyard dirt, I realized something. I hadn't been kicked out. That would have required confrontation, discomfort. No, they'd erased me so quietly it sounded like logic, like love wearing gloves, and no one missed me. Not that night, not for a long time. I started walking because staying in the yard made me feel like forgotten furniture, there but unseen. My shoes were too thin for the frost, and the cold air bit at the edges of my sleeves. I didn't have a destination, just the instinct to move, to not be still long enough for the ache to settle in my chest. Downtown Asheville was still half asleep, the streets silvered with morning frost. The sidewalks smelled faintly of damp leaves and old coffee grounds. I passed shuttered shops with signs that tried too hard to sound cheerful, but then I saw it. A flickering red neon sign that read, "Open," barely convincing anyone, but enough for me. The smell of cinnamon and something warm pulled at me like a memory I didn't know I had. Frank's Bakery sat between a pawn shop and a closed-down laundromat. The window was fogged from the inside, but I could see a man inside moving a mop in slow, practiced strokes. I must have stared too long because he opened the door and looked at me without saying a word. Just a small tilt of the head and a bigger door left ajar. Instead of asking who I was or what I needed, he handed me a broom. That first morning, I swept in silence. The radio played old jazz, and Frank didn't say much, just nodded now and then. When my fingers cracked from the cold, he slid a pair of gloves across the counter. When my stomach growled, a sandwich quietly appeared next to the cash register. He never asked why I was there, and somehow that made it easier to stay. By Friday, he handed me a key to the upstairs room. "Storage," he said, and that was all. Up the narrow stairs, past flour bags and crates of mason jars, was a room with a mattress no thicker than a folded towel. The floor creaked and the air smelled like yeast and dust. But when I lay down that night, it felt like something I hadn't had in a long time. Peace. It was quiet except for the gentle hum of the ovens below and the comfort of knowing I wasn't a burden here. I watched the frost melt on the windows as dawn approached. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was trespassing inside my own life. And maybe, just maybe, I believed Grandpa Jameson was right. I had more steel in me than they ever saw. I lived above that bakery for nearly 4 years, and I never told a soul. Mornings began before the sun even flirted with the horizon. The air smelled of yeast and cold concrete, and my body knew the routine better than any alarm. I'd roll up the thin mattress, tuck it behind the sugar sacks, and brush the flour off my sleeves before slipping downstairs. Frank was always already there, never said good morning, never asked if I slept well. He'd just nod, then hand me the mop or motion to the ovens. That was enough. At 16, I started taking night classes at the community college. Not because I dreamed of degrees or graduation gowns. Those were for kids who got bedroom walls and warm dinners. I studied because numbers made sense. Supply chains, inventory spreadsheets, profit margins, they all followed rules. I couldn't make sense of why my mother preferred Lily or why my father stood silent, but I could forecast bakery demand down to the hour. That was something. Frank never praised me, not once. But when I burned a pie and flinched at the smell, he didn't scold me. He just showed me how to fold the edge again. No words. That was praise in his language. I picked up a bookkeeping job at a hardware store 3 blocks down. The owner, Mrs. Lanigan, liked that I never took breaks. By 18, I was working 6 days a week, rotating between shifts at the bakery, evening lectures, and weekend ledgers. Holidays came and went. Valentine's Day, extra cookie orders, Christmas. Frank let me close early. "Don't burn the shop down," he muttered once. I stayed in anyway, sorting invoices. I had no prom dress, no graduation party, but I had folders, neatly labeled, color-coded. I'd saved every check, clipped every receipt. I even framed my first tax return. It was ugly and crooked, but it was mine. By the time I turned 21, I had just enough for a down payment. The real estate agent wrinkled her nose at the creaky house on the edge of Asheville. "It has potential," she said, which is real estate for, "You'll need to scrub for days." I signed the deed anyway. I moved in that afternoon with 1 mattress, a folding chair, and a framed photo of me sitting on Grandpa Jameson's lap, both of us covered in hay and grinning like we'd tricked the world. I set the photo on the windowsill, then pulled out a bucket and got to work on the kitchen floor. That's how I mark my victories now, not with noise, but with motion. I didn't need a welcome home. I just needed a deed with my name on it. The doorbell rang while I was brushing flour off a blueprint for my home bakery. I almost ignored it. My hands were sticky from dough and marker ink, and I still had 2 racks of cooling trays to scrub before the inspector came next week. The eggs were sweating on the counter. The room smelled of yeast, ink, and possibility. But the doorbell rang again. Frank once told me, "People you left behind tend to come back the moment you're almost free." I hadn't thought about that in years. But when I opened the door and saw the matching polos and wide, practiced smiles, I knew he'd been right all along. My mother stood in front, chirping my name like it was a song she used to love. Behind her, Lily balanced a toddler on her hip, another clinging to her leg, and a baby carrier hanging from her elbow like a fashion statement. My father brought up the rear, hands in pockets, gaze pointed at the rhododendrons blooming near my porch. They looked proud, like they were about to tour a museum exhibit called Rachel, the Good Daughter, Finally Useful. I didn't say anything, just leaned slightly against the doorframe and waited. "This place is adorable," my mother beamed, already craning her neck to peek past my shoulder. "We heard you were starting something. A bakery?" I nodded once. Slow. "I didn't invite them in." Lily giggled, shifting her weight. "It's wild seeing you here. We were just talking about you the other day, how you always liked baking." I didn't remind her that I'd learned to bake in silence while she was opening baby shower gifts inside a house I wasn't allowed to enter. "Well," Susan began, smoothing her blouse, "we were actually in the area, and David said we had to stop by." She nudged my father, who nodded like he'd just remembered he had a neck. Then came the real reason. They always wrap the ask in a warm memory or a compliment that doesn't quite land. "You've done well," Susan said. "And Lily's little family. Well, they've had a rough stretch. Their rentals being sold. We thought, since you have this place all to yourself, maybe there's room?" I looked down. Their shoes were spotless. Not a trace of flour or dirt. They hadn't walked a step in my kind of life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said, "I lived in a tent in your backyard." The air shifted. Lily blinked too fast. My mother's smile twitched, then stiffened like a bad photograph. My father looked down and stayed there. No one spoke for a long moment. Somewhere inside, my timer beeped. The eggs on the counter had started to sweat through the paper bag. I didn't slam the door. I closed it the way you shut off an old light you never needed. And for the first time in a long while, the silence inside my house felt like safety, not absence. The envelope came on a Tuesday, thin paper, but it might as well have been carved in stone. My name, typed neatly across the front, sat beneath the letterhead of a law office downtown. "Connors vs. Connors," the subject read. Inside, words I hadn't heard in years appeared like old bruises surfacing. Family trust, equitable share, beneficiaries. My parents, and Lily by extension, were petitioning for shared legal claim to my home. They said it was purchased using family money, a contribution I apparently owed them for being born. I sat with that letter in my kitchen, hands dusted in flour from the new test batch I never finished. The blueprint for my bakery was half curled on the table. The noise outside, the birds, a passing truck, the dog next door, blurred beneath the weight of that page. Grandpa Jameson's voice came back then, clear as ever. "If you ever feel like someone's circling your peace, it means you've built something worth guarding." I found Adele Watkins that afternoon, a name whispered by the hardware store owner who once taught me how to calculate bulk discounts in my head. Adele's office smelled like lemons and deadlines. No art on the walls, no music, just binders arranged like sentries behind her desk. She didn't ask why I was there, just gestured to the chair, adjusted her glasses, and waited. I slid the letter across the desk. "They're trying to say this house is theirs, that I used money from a trust I didn't even know existed." Adele read the page in silence, lips pressed into a line that didn't move. Then she leaned back and said, "Let's talk about what you do know." So I told her, about the tent behind the house, about the bakery where Frank handed me a broom instead of a question, about every shift, every receipt, every community college tuition slip I'd paid out of pocket, about the day I found Grandpa's box in the attic of the hardware store, his letters and a crumpled draft of a will no one had ever mentioned. Adele took notes like a court reporter, barely blinking. By the end, she had a timeline. She had facts. And she had a name. Jameson Connors. 2 days later, she called me back. "Your grandfather's will was real," she said over the phone, "and it was filed. Rachel, you are the sole beneficiary. They didn't want you to know that." Silence fell between us. She continued, voice steady. "Your parents claimed guardianship after he died. They liquidated the trust within a year, used it to pay off Lily's college tuition, wedding expenses, and a new SUV, all without your consent." The line stayed quiet. I think I stopped breathing for a second. Adele didn't soften her tone. You don't just have a defense, you have proof. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hush, settling over a courtroom. I looked around my kitchen, the flour, the lemon zest still curling in a bowl, the life I had built, inch by inch, paycheck by paycheck. I never wanted to fight them. I didn't build this house with war in mind, but I wouldn't let them rewrite what I bled to build. The courtroom smelled like waxed floors and old intentions, the kind of scent that clung to your coat long after you'd left, like a memory that hadn't decided whether to stay or go. Wooden benches creaked beneath tense shoulders. The judge, a woman in her 50s with weary eyes, glanced over her glasses as if she'd seen far too many families crack across that room's center line. I sat beside Adele, who didn't fidget or fuss with her papers. Her silence was the same as always, methodical, certain, necessary. I didn't bring anyone with me. No friends, no coworkers, just the folder she told me to carry containing copies of every receipt, photo, and letter I'd filed away over the years, like breadcrumbs leading back to the truth. My parents sat a row behind their attorney. Susan wore pearls and a practiced smile. David looked at his shoes like they had answers. Lily avoided my eyes completely. Her kids weren't there, just as well. This was no place for children. When court opened, Adele stood without flourish. She presented the will, Grandpa Jameson's words in their original ink, notarized and forgotten in a file drawer until someone decided to circle my piece. She walked the court through the trust's liquidation, the wire transfers, the purchases, the dates. No embellishment, just numbers and facts. Susan's lawyer objected once. Sustained. It didn't matter. Then the judge looked at me. Miss Connors, were you ever notified about this inheritance? I stood, hands at my side. No, Your Honor. Were you made aware at 18? I shook my head. Not then, not ever. I found out by accident. The judge turned to Susan. Mrs. Connors, did you or your husband notify your daughter when she reached legal adulthood? Susan opened her mouth, but no sound came. David reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. I believed. We all lived under the same roof once, she said, voice trembling just slightly. We used the funds for the family, for stability. Adele didn't speak. She didn't need to. The judge exhaled, then leaned forward. This court finds in favor of the defendant. All property rights remain solely with Miss Connors. The trust was violated, and restitution will be addressed in probate court. Her gavel struck with a tired thud. Not justice triumphant, just justice delivered. As we stood to leave, Susan reached for my arm, fingers light, trembling. Her face, a mixture of apology and hope. I stepped back, slow but sure. You chose Lily, I said, my voice even. Now I'm choosing peace. We didn't speak again. That night, I returned to my house. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and yeast. My blueprint for the bakery still sat on the table, anchored by a bag of sugar and a wooden spoon. Life hadn't paused, just held its breath. I opened the photo box and found the picture of me and Grandpa Jameson, the one where he wore a hat too big and I held a whisk like a sword. I placed it above the fireplace. Beneath it, I mounted a small brass plaque I'd had engraved weeks earlier. Just 5 words. This house was built from silence. And below it, in smaller script, not from love, and that is enough. I placed Grandpa's photo above the fireplace not to remember the pain, but to honor the quiet strength he once saw in me. That house was never built with love, but it was held together by grit, by truth, and by the choice to end a cycle. Sometimes family doesn't break with shouts. It fades with silence, and that silence can be louder than any goodbye. In this life, peace isn't something given. It's something we claim quietly when we know we've done enough. If this story spoke to a part of your journey, I'd be honored to hear it. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or just sit with it a while. Some truths only settle in stillness.